In this step, we're going to cover how to manage IIS websites with PowerShell. So before we get started, there are a few prereqs. First is you obviously need to have IIS installed on a remote web server. We are going to be using PowerShell remoting to connect to a remote web server to do that. And then one snip that you may want to refer to is how to manage IIS application pools with PowerShell. We're going to be working a little bit with application pools, and it wouldn't hurt for you to get comfortable with how to manage IIS application pools because they are so directly related to the websites that we're going to be covering here. All right, so the first thing I need to do is establish an interactive session. I'm going to be doing this to work directly on the web server. Once I do that, have that session, I'll need to import my module, Web Administration, to make available the IIS PowerShell drive and also the commandlets as well. All right, now that we're in, let's first simply enumerate all the websites. So notice that we just have 3 there. And I really don't like the format of how get website returns all that stuff. So I normally just pipe this to format table dash auto size, and that gives us a nice cleaner look there. So we have the default website, bindings 81 and 82, the What's Up Gold website at 80, and then also an automate website at 80. And then you can see the stop there. 2 of them are stopped and 1 is started. We can also use the IIS drive, which is very similar, same concept. Actually, the commandlets themselves use the IIS drive in the background. And they're interchangeable, but you'll find it'll have a lot more functionality and you can get a lot more granular by using the IIS drive. So now that you can just enumerate out the websites, how do you create one? Well, just to create one with no hubbub whatsoever, we can simply use new website. When I run new website, that's all there is to it. We provide the name of the website and the physical path. So that is the path on the file system. So this website is going to be at c.inetpub www root. That's going to be the home folder. And you can see that it creates a stopped state, and then it binds it automatically to port 80 HTTP. So what if you want to do a more complicated site? You can do a lot of different things. In this case, I'm going to be using the IIS drive here. When I use the IIS drive, I will use all of the item commandlets in PowerShell. So get child item, new item, set item property. Those are all PowerShell drive specific commandlets. So to create a site, I need to run new item against the IIS drive and the site's quote-unquote folder, the container, I guess, if you will. And then here I'm providing a name of Automate Boring Stuff Advanced. I'm saying the type is site because PowerShell drives are generic, so I need to provide what type of object I'm going to create in here. And then I'm setting the bindings to, instead of the default of HTTP port 80, I'm binding it to HTTP 8021. So I'll go ahead and run this, and then now notice that we created it. Not only was the site started automatically, but we can also change the bindings. We can change these things at runtime. Okay, so what if I want to change the physical path? I could do that as well. It's just a simple matter of using set item property this time. So we have new item, which creates new sites. Then we have set item property, which can change attributes of the site. So we need to use set item property, specify the path of the newly created site that we created, name of physical path, the attribute name, and then the value of C sites automate boring stuff advanced. We run this, and it makes it happen. And then finally, the same concept can be done for the ID attribute as well. But it looks like it says cannot create a file when that file already exists. Okay, this is one error that you will see sometimes that does not make any sense whatsoever. This actually means there's a conflict of some kind because there's a website with the ID of 4 already out there. I must have done this whenever I was practicing the demo. So this is a good indication of a typical problem that you're going to come up with. When you look at the error message, you're going to have no idea what this is talking about. So to figure out what's going on here, so let's say that I do want to create an ID of 4 on here. Let's try to figure out what website actually has that ID of 4. So I will use the get website here, which will enumerate all of them, as you know. And then I'm not really familiar where that ID attribute is, to be honest with you. So what I do is I'll pipe that to select star and see if I can find any of these here. So it looks like there is an ID property. All right, so if there's an ID property, let's do select name and ID. And it looks like Automate Boring Stuff, not Automate Boring Stuff Advanced, already has the ID of 4. So that's why we got that obscure error message. So let's say that, I don't know, let's just remove the Automate Boring Stuff website for now because I'm not going to be using that. All right, and then I'll pipe this to remove website. That will completely remove it. All right, now that it's removed, now let's try to change the value of ID. And now that it has changed, so you'll get that obscure error message sometime about a file not being available, but it's always because there's some kind of conflict. And then let's say that we want to keep the binding of 8021, but we want to add another one to Automate Boring Stuff Advanced. We can this time run new item property instead of set item property, and that creates another binding. All right, so now that we have the binding set up, let's check the bindings here. All right, now you can see that we have 8021 and 8022, so we have successfully bound those to there. So that's an introduction to creating the website and changing some attributes on it too. All right, so now that we know we can create websites, let's talk about modifying them. We modified them a little bit in the previous example. Let's go a little bit deeper now. Remember, whenever we created a website with new website, the status was stopped. So let me check the status of the websites now. So we have our one that we just created called Automate. It's stopped. So maybe I want to, I don't know, maybe I want to start it. So I will do the Automate one. And we can choose any of these. It doesn't matter. We could just pipe that to start service. And then notice that we got that cannot create a file when the file already exists. Again, that's because there's some kind of conflict there. Automate cannot start because there's some kind of conflict. Now notice that this is usually done from the bindings or the ID. There's a lot of different attributes that make this happen that have to be unique. Notice here that we have the What's Up Gold website, which it started already. It's already taken HTTP 80, and our Automate website also wants HTTP 80, so that's why it will not work. We would have to change the web binding again because I don't necessarily want to change the web binding again because I don't really need to at this point. All right, so let's change this back, and then we will now run this, and then now we can see Automate Boring Stuff Advanced is started. So that's great. So we were able to start this. And then since we've already tracked down some conflicting bindings in the previous example, I'm not going to go through this example here in the script, but you at least have the code available on the GitHub repo to take care of all that. All right, and we've also changed the physical path on a lot of these things. So I have a lot of examples here. You can do this a number of different ways. But I'm not necessarily going to be changing all these things because I'll just frankly be repeating myself. The process of changing these things is fairly straightforward if you have the web administration module created. All right, so we've already started it. So now let's just change some logging settings. This is a little bit different. We use the set and get item properties again. And this time we're passing the IIS website name on the IIS drive, setting the log file, which is the attribute name, and then the value there, we have to provide a hash table. And in this instance, I'm just changing log format. I'm making sure it's enabled, changing the directory and the period. So the value always has to be a hash table. All right, so I will run this. Nothing happened, which I assume it worked, but we can use the get item property to then verify that it worked. Then we can run down through here and see we have log format of W3C. It is enabled true. The directory is C sites logs, and the period is daily. So we did change it successfully. Next step is we want to remove it. Removing sites is extremely easy. I just did that earlier. Get website, pipe it to remove website. And let's make sure all of the stuff that we did was cleaned up. I just cleaned up Automate Boring Stuff. I want to clean up the Automate one and Automate Boring Stuff Advanced. Oh, looks like I can't do two at once. That's unfortunate. All right, so we'll just pipe this to remove website, and we want to remove Automate Boring Stuff Advanced. Make sure all of them are done. Yep, we just have the default and the What's Up Gold one. All right, cool. Now I'll get out of my interactive session, and we will bring this all together with a function. All right, I created myself a new custom wrapper function called new IIS website that allows me to do error handling and various validation techniques and set default value. This is a function that maybe whenever I create a website, I always have the same settings, and I want to make sure there's certain settings that are always set. That's a really good way to create a custom function here. This custom function, just like any other PowerShell function, for the parameters though, I have a name, which is the name of the website, application pool name. This goes back to the application pool snip that I refer to at the start. Maybe a good idea to learn about how to manage these. And then we have computer name, which is the name of the remote web server, host header, IP address, physical path, port. All those are various attributes you can remove or add in here at any time. And then the credential object, which is the credential object we're going to use to pass alternate credentials to the web server. And then finally, I've added a switch parameter in here that will allow us to overwrite sites if we need to. And then inside of the code, we have, I'm not going to go down through it in individual lines, but we have the section to validate the IP address. Wrapping this into a function allows us to validate. We provided a valid IP address if we don't want all of them. And then we have a script block section that then has all the code that we're going to send to the remote web server to run. This runs through each of the individual sections that we did before, importing the web administration module to make sure the IIS drive and the commandlets are available. Then we are verifying that the website path is available. So the website path, which is the site on the IIS drive, so we're able to say if it's already there, it's going to say it already exists. That allows us to not go through all the hassle of getting that crazy obscure error message that the commandlets throw. We can build our own commandlets. And then we verify that the application pool exists. And then we verify that the physical path exists. If it does not exist, then we just create it. So we're able to add this additional functionality in here. And then finally, we have the force there. We're checking if the force is not present, then we're going to throw an error message. The physical path, which is the path on the file system, already exists. And then here on line 186 through 190, because this was an actual function that I had created a long time ago, and this is an instance that I know failed. During debugging that I had at one time, I knew this failed, so I was able to add fixes here, known fixes, into this function that allow me to save this functionality so I don't have to worry about and Google whatever that obscure error message is again. All right, once we go through all that validation, then we finally create the website, and we create it with new item this time. Instead of new website, we're using the IIS drive, passing the path, all the bindings information in there, physical path, all that attributes. Then we're going to pass that. All will run on the remote web server. And then finally, we have the custom default setting. This allows us to set any kind of defaults that we need. In this instance, I'm using set item property to make sure the application pool is set correctly and change the preload enabled app defaults to true. So we're able to set various default attributes in there. And then finally, we just have the code to actually run the command with PowerShell remoting. All right, so let's see how this works. So I will bring this into my session here. All right, so I will create one called Automate, the application pool of Automate, on the remote web server that I have saved as computer name. So let's see what happens here. If this were not in a custom function, we would have probably gotten some obscure error message that you saw before. But since we're able to add our own error message in here, we see that it says the IIS physical path already exists. So it's saying the physical path already exists. Now we can run the force. Let's see what happens when we add force. So we have the ability here, because we added that force parameter in, to override that and just go ahead and just make it happen anyway. So let's see if this works. Okay, so it says the website Automate created successfully. It went through everything. That was when the app pool was already created. Now that the app pool is actually created, called Automate, let's just make sure here. All right, we will check and see what app pools are on here. We can do that by using the get IIS app pool command. All right, and we'll look down through here. See, there's a lot of different stuff that we're not looking for. So let's just limit this to the name property. All right, so we do see that Automate morning stuff and Automate, the app pool already exists. Okay, so let's go ahead and just remove this app pool and see what happens. So we do get app pool name. We're going to use the Automate app pool in this instance. So, all right, we got that. Now we can pipe it to remove web app pool. Notice that it's another problem with the commandlets. Notice that it has the name of get IIS app pool. To actually remove it, we use remove web app pool. The commandlet names are very, let's just say, a lot to be desired. That's why I've created some custom functions. So now that the web app pool is not there, let's go ahead and remove the website again. So to do that, we'll just quickly go remove get website, name, and we need that the same. Run this just to make sure we got the right one. Yep. And then we'll pipe it to remove website. All right, no more website. Let's run this again and see what happens. Now it says the application pool automate does not exist. That's another example of we hit that error validation in there. All right, so now let's create the app pool again to demonstrate what happens when it actually works. All right, so now that the app pool exists, we'll run new IIS website again, our custom function. And then you can see again, we hit some error validation again. You might get frustrating at first because why is this thing erroring? But what you don't realize is this would have been a problem whenever you put this into production or when in testing or whenever. You need to get these errors as soon as possible. It's frustrating because there's, especially in these custom functions, it can be so complicated that you don't realize it, but this is all part of PowerShell debugging. All right, so let's run this again with the force. And then using the force, that allows us to override that message and say, I don't care if there's a folder already exists, just go ahead and use it anyway. That has been a snip on how to manage IIS websites with PowerShell.